Here we are. This is the last message for 2020. It's definitely been a good ride, I hope. Thinking back when we started back in April into where we are right now. And so I want to say thank you for your consistency in joining us on these Tuesday nights. And it's my hope and my belief that the word has definitely been one of confirmation, but as also that you all find yourself growing. Leaps and bounds is my prayer, that you can honestly say that over the course of this time, that your life has been impacted and that you have been growing more intimate with the Father. Ultimately, that's what this is all about, that you are having these encounters with God, and that God is revealing himself to you, and in like fashion that he's also showing you how he sees you. And from that vantage point, I believe that we can live a life that is more in line with what God is calling us to do. I want to give a quick kind of recap over these last couple of months because it ties into what we're going to talk about tonight. So if you think about when we first started talking, uh, you know, the first thing that you may have heard me say, and if you never heard me say this, let me put it out there. When God is introducing something, uh, the primary way that he introduces a new thing is by a word, okay? We see this in Genesis when God spoke something, he saw something, okay? So he announced what it was that he wanted to bring to pass. And then in the announcing, he said, let there be, and then there was, okay? The second thing about the word, and I believe this is in Ephesians chapter 5, God washes us through the word, okay? And so when you're hearing a word from God, what it is that he's doing, he's announcing something that he's getting ready to bring you into, but subsequently he's also washing you from something that he wants off of you, okay? And so when we first started these Bible studies, we started along the topic line of rediscovering the lost you. And this was a conversation that deals with identity, okay? Uh, you know, one of the main things that leads to a lot of issues in the life of the believer is that we are living beneath our privilege. And I was talking to my brother Tim the other day, and we were talking about the fact that a lot of believers, we don't take advantage of nepotism. And if you're not familiar with what nepotism is, long story short, nepotism is when you have somebody who's in a position of authority and them favoring their family members, them particularly favoring, their children, and they're putting them in the best position possible for them to succeed. And in many cases, we don't always take advantage of our relationship with God. We choose to live as a foreigner, even as the word talks about uh, the parable of the son who left his father. It said that he had to come to himself and realize that he had it better in his father's house. And so, oftentimes we take on that same posture where we choose to do things contrary to God until we have that light bulb moment that, you know what, I'm doing this the difficult way, and let me reconnect with my father. And so from the conversation of identity, we began to transition into what it means to be the sons of God. Now, once again, this sons of God is not an all exclusive list as it relates to just males. We know this to be both males and females, but more specifically, the sons of God represent the mature ones, meaning the father can trust you with his stuff. Ultimately, he can trust you with a greater level of responsibility. And so from this place of responsibility, we began the conversation around the subject line of application. What does it mean to advance the kingdom that God has given unto me? What does it mean to operate in the world that God has placed us in? And so we talked about a few key topics. We said that one, faith was what the currency of heaven. The word says that Abraham, it was credited unto him as righteousness. His display of faith was credited to him, which is a monetary term that we understand. But once again, we're looking at it through the lens of how faith gets us, is the means of transaction here as it relates to the spirit. Okay. We also talked about the love, that love was the language of heaven. Jesus Christ says to his disciples that they will know you by the way that you love one another. Okay. And so we too have the responsibility to model and demonstrate that love, because that signifies our connection with Jesus Christ. And then the other thing we talked about was the spirit. The spirit is the identification of heaven. Everybody has an ID card. When we're all born, we're given a birth record, and that identifies the country or the nation in which we belong to. And so the Holy Spirit, which is the seal of our salvation, that is the identification that we have as it relates to being believers. Okay. And so over the last few weeks, as we begin to transition towards the latter part of this year, over the last few weeks, we've been talking about choices, and we've been talking about motives. And if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked along the subject line of what do you want? The reality is that a lot of us who call ourselves believers, who identify with the person of Jesus Christ, we're in it for the benefits. But we have to ask ourselves, when does Jesus become enough? Okay. The thing that kept that subsequently eliminated a lot of people from the equation in John chapter 6 was the fact that they only wanted Jesus because of what he could do for them, not because they desired a relationship with him. Now, as mature ones, there's an example in Psalms when Moses, the word says that Moses knew the ways of God, but the children of Israel only knew God's acts, meaning that Moses had relationship and God was opening up a new dynamic to him. But if we're only pursuing God for the stuff, we'll never get to tap into what it is that God wants for us. And here's the reality. The word says that in the presence of the Lord, there's fullness of joy, and at his right hand, there are pleasures from forevermore. Also in Matthew 6, the word says that seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. And so if we're making our focus the lower things, we're losing out on the reality that the things come with relationship anyway. Okay. And because we are kingdom citizens, understanding our assignment, there's certain things that belong to you and to that assignment anyway. But it's from relationship with God that you begin to understand what belongs to you because you are his, or more specifically, what he's given you access to because you're his. Okay. And so this all ties in, and this all leads up to what we're going to talk about on tonight. And so tonight, I'm going to do a little bit of reading. It's the passages that I'm reading from both come from the book of Exodus. And so I'm going to read Exodus chapter 4, verse 1 through 5. And then I'm going to go to Exodus chapter 14, verse 8 through 16. Okay. And so that is Exodus 4, verse 1 through 5. And then Exodus chapter 14, verse 8 through 16. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it. This is Exodus 4, verse 1 through 5. And it says, then Moses answered and said, but suppose that they will not believe me or listen to my voice. Suppose they say, the Lord has not appeared to you. So the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? He said, a rod. And he said, cast it on the ground. So he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses fled from it. Then the Lord said to Moses, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. And he reached out his hand and caught it. And it became a rod in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. All right, so I'm signifying, I'm highlighting the word rod, okay? Now jumping over to Exodus 14. Once again, this is Exodus 14, verses 8 through 16. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with boldness. So the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen, and his army, and overtook them camping by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth, before Baal-zephon. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were very afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, because there are no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. And Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. And the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward, but lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And so tonight we're going to talk about the Lord has you where he wants you. Okay. The Lord has you where he wants you. Now, I'm going to put the responsibility on you and ask that you go back and read the backstory of the events that led up to this moment. But one of the first takeaways that I want you to get, and I know I've shared this with a few of you, but Egypt in this passage symbolizes the system of oppression, okay? It's a system absent of God that dictates the terms of the people's survival, okay? So Egypt is symbolic of oppression, okay? It doesn't mean that there weren't any good times there in Egypt. It doesn't mean that there weren't any good times. You know, there was a season where the children of Israel actually thrived there. You know, when Joseph, you know, ushered them in, it says that they grew exponentially. Okay, but we also have to understand that as the dynamics in that system changed and it became a more oppressive society, that it was God keeping them still in that system. Okay, however, there came a point when God was pulling them out of it and they were afraid to leave, okay? And so that's what we see right now in this text. God was pulling them out of this place of oppression, but they were afraid to leave. The reason they were afraid to leave was not because they enjoyed being beaten. It wasn't because they enjoyed, you know, the harshness of their punishment, the harshness of the labor where they were, you know, making bricks and they didn't have any straw. The reason they were afraid to leave is because they didn't trust God. Okay, they did not trust God. They literally have the system of oppression chasing them down. Okay, but the journey that they're on didn't make sense to them. Okay, so they're leaving this place of bondage. They have the Egyptian army at their back in the Red Sea to them. And God is telling them, you know, not telling them to go back to the oppression. He's telling them to go forward, meaning literally walk towards the water, to walk towards this thing that by all accounts, you know it's an impossibility for you to walk through it or walk over it. Okay. And the significance of this is that once again, with the system of oppression chasing them down, this impossible obstacle in front of their face, God had them right where he wanted them. Let me qualify what it is that I'm saying. And so the word says that Moses said to the people, don't be afraid, stand still, see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For these Egyptians whom you see today, you shall again see no more forever. The Lord will fight for you and shall hold your peace. How can God fight for you if there's no opposition? Okay. How can God demonstrate his capability in battle if we don't find ourselves in places of adversity? And so ultimately, they're having to trust the God that they don't know to be able to save them in this situation. The reason why we ultimately as believers a lot of times don't have confidence in the unknown is because we don't trust the one who's leading us. And so here it is that God is directing them out of the only system that they have ever known. They've known it to be rough, they've known it to be harsh, but it is literally the only thing that they've ever known. And God is saying that I'm leading you into another way, but the challenge is that they don't have the confidence to go forward. Their coming to the Red Sea was symbolic of them coming to an end of themselves. And I want you to highlight that because I'm going to break that down what it means. It means that they were coming to the end of themselves. They were faced with adversity at their back, an impossible obstacle in front of their face. And what this moment symbolized was they had come to a point in their life where they had to realize and recognize that the moving forward or the advancement of their life was totally reliant upon God. We a few of us were in this fasting time, and one of the things that the Lord had really dealt with me over the course of that 3 weeks was I was struggling to trust him. And I need to, and I'm the one, giving the classes, so I'm gonna be 100% honest, 100% transparent. God had told me that I had reached a ceiling because I mastered, I understood my capabilities, the things that I could do. But what it was is I was trusting in my own strength and not his. Now the challenge is that I know the system, but I don't know what's behind this Red Sea. And in many instances, that's the hindrance for a lot of us. We know the system that we're in. We know the bad, we know some of the good, and we've determined within ourselves that, hey, you know what? That's the devil I know, so I'll deal with it. There's the expression, the devil you know versus the devil you don't know, whatever. But I know this system, but I don't know this way. And so within my own mind, I've determined that this oppression, I can deal with that, but I struggle to deal with the unknown. And when we're coming to the end of ourselves, what we're saying is that God, I am totally trusting you, even though wherever you're leading me, I understand it to be beyond my control. And so the trust dynamic that I was struggling with was I like to be in control, and God was asking me to surrender it all. Essentially, God was telling me to die to self so that I could go further in what it was that he wanted me to experience. There's a lot of lessons that we should have gotten out of 2020. And with everyone on this call, with everyone who'll see this video later, I hope that one of the main lessons that you were able to get out of this year was God's dependability, your ability to trust him in chaotic times. I'll be 100% honest with you, 2020 was a difficult year. But I've had worse years. And so the 20, as people may say, well, 2020 was the worst year of my life. That's not my testimony, because God was keeping me in this season. God has kept us in this season. And so I won't make the confession that this was my worst year, because it wasn't my worst year. To be honest, I've experienced a lot of favor in 2020. But here's the thing: what God is saying, as we're moving forward to 2021, the root, if our ability to trust God is rooted in the extent of our ability to understand, we have the ability to pull away. And let me say it a different way. If your ability to trust God is rooted in your extent or the limits in which you can understand, there's a greater probability or greater likelihood that you are going to start to doubt God. And when we get into doubt, then we start to measure, once again, things based upon our own ability. And as we're measuring things on our own ability, there's a greater likelihood that we're going to move away from what it is that God is saying. There's a greater likelihood that we're going to settle in this oppression, this oppressive system, this oppression that is trying to destroy us spiritually. We're going to justify within ourselves that, you know what, it really ain't that bad. Yeah, God, you know, I get that you're leading me, but I really don't want that. And if you think about what we've been talking about leading up into this moment, as it relates to choices, as it relates to motives, the children of Israel, even as they crossed over the Red Sea, they still struggled with the narrative of trust. And that became their stumbling block, and it became their downfall as it related to their inability to obtain the things that God had for them. Here's the thing about what God is going to do for you. In adversity, God will remind you of the tools that he gave you to win. What God said to Moses when they first met each other, he said, "What is in your hand?" And Moses, it was his rod. He throws it down, it turns into a snake. He picks it up, it turns back into a rod again. God is going to remind you of the tools that he's given you to win. He's going to remind you of the burden that he placed on you. He's going to remind you of the family members, the business that he started told you to create. He's going to remind you of these things because that was the motivation that led you on the path that you're on right now. And so when we come against these impossible odds, what did he tell Moses? He said, "Stop crying. Tell the people to go forward and lift up what it is that I gave you to do." And so God is going to remind us what it was that initiated us getting started on this journey with him. And so God has you right where he wants you. A lot of us are in a tight space wondering why God has me here. And the ultimate reason why he has you here is for you to identify, do you trust him? Do you trust him in this situation? We trusted him when it's easy, but do we trust him when it's difficult? And let me tell you that as you progress in your relationship with the Lord, it doesn't necessarily get easy as it relates to the things you encounter, but once again, you should have developed a track record with God's consistency that you understand that he has you in any situation. Win, lose, or fail, God is still with you and God is still for you. Everything that you're going to encounter going forward will place a new demand on you. That's essentially what I'm saying. Everything that you encounter going forward places a new demand on you. Up until this point, the children of Israel knew what it meant to be slaves, but they didn't know what it meant to be rulers. God was ushering them from slavery, getting ready to put them essentially in a 2-year school where they learned what it meant to be rulers, because he was setting them up for rulership. And so the things that God is pulling you out of is a setup for your next season. But if we're so complacent and we're so desirous of the what's the word I'm looking for? The creature comforts that we experience in this place of oppression, we'll never enter in what it is that God is wanting for us. Going forward, a lot of the people that we've been praying for, crying about and stuff like that, God's going to begin to highlight that you are the one that he has given the burden and the responsibility of leading them and praying them through. That's your responsibility. It ain't for you to say, "Oh, let me call this person and have them do it." God's going to begin to highlight that you are the man. You are the woman for the assignment in the situation. But once again, he has you right here for you to highlight and understand, God, yes or no, I do or don't trust you. Because once again, the conversation about choices, the difficulty is recognizing that it wasn't the devil, it wasn't the haters, it was me who got me in this situation. And as we begin to take more ownership and become more accountable in our walk with the Lord, then we can be more singular in the things that God is calling us to do. We become more focused, and we become more understanding of the responsibility that he has given us. But once again, look at the place that he has you, whether it be in your finances. We talked about this before. A lot of us are financially in a bad place, not because someone was out to get us, but because of a series of choices that we made. But God is pulling us out of that bondage, that oppression, whether it be finances, bad relationship, bad health. God will begin to pull you out of that system, and he will begin to highlight the necessity for you to trust him with where he's leading. Even though you don't know what's beyond what it is, where it is he has you, we have to have the confidence that he has led me here. And our confession won't be what the children of Israel said: you've brought me out of bondage just for me to die here. That's not our confession. You've brought me out of bondage because you want me to be in a place of rulership and dominion. God's initial assignment for all of humanity was dominion, okay? God has never reneged on his assignment for any of us. God has made the provision for us to walk in our place of dominion and authority. The provision that he put in place was Jesus Christ. And so from this place of being restored because we've accepted Jesus Christ, the $1 million question in April and the $1 million question in December is, what is keeping you from operating in your place of dominion? God has you right where he wants you, and that is, what choice will you make going forward? Now, we've seen that, whether it be as the operation of churches, whether it be the operation of business, we've been calling for the old to return. Okay, and I hope that this is becoming more clear to you. We've been calling for a return of things as they were, but the reality is things aren't going back to how they were. So here it is. I have this Red Sea in front of me. I don't know what's beyond it, but I know who brought me here. I'm not going back to 2019. 2021 is a couple of days ahead of me. And I know that things aren't going back to business as usual. So what lies ahead of me going on to the next year? And let me tell you this before I close. The changing of a calendar year does not signify change. The changing of your mind is what signifies real change. Be ye not conformed by the things of the world, but be ye transformed by a renewing of the mind. You can go into January 2021 and it still be as jacked up as it was in March of 2020 if you don't change your mind. And I hope that everybody on this call understands that at some point in time, we are going to have to choose to have our minds changed as it relates to the way we view life. And it's my hope that you begin to view life as God is telling you to view life. That is the charge. So over the last 7 months, as it relates to your identity, start seeing yourself as God sees you. Start understanding your position of authority. Start understanding that the mature ones, there should be a desire to grow. We shouldn't want to, even as Paul says, you come to a point in life where you should be eating meat, not still drinking milk. There has to be a desire for us to grow. When I was a kid, my mother's on here right now, I couldn't wait to grow up. I couldn't wait to get out, from my understanding, I couldn't wait to get out of the house. I couldn't wait to drive. There were certain responsibilities that comes with growing up. And what I want to tell you is spiritually, there's certain things that belong to you, but you won't obtain it until you grow up. And growing up is really, it deals with a choice. I'm going to choose to look at things differently. I'm going to choose to trust God, and through this process, understand that he's with me. And then that is what helps us to grow. The adversity comes, but God demonstrates his ability. And in that, I'm growing in my faith. And I can believe for greater when the next series of tests and obstacles come. That's how we grow. And then once again, we understand how to operate in this kingdom. And so it's my hope, once again, that as we begin to move forward, you're going to start to see some changes on our platform. I shared this with a few of you all, but over the days and weeks to come, we're going to be introducing some new things, and I'm excited about it. But all of these things are connected with one choice to maturity and understanding that we are in the season and the time that God has for us. And so I'll open up the floor for questions, but I'm excited about what it is that God is doing in the lives of everyone on this call. Uh, and I trust that you are too excited. But once again, ask yourself, am I growing? And if I'm not, what choices am I making that are keeping me pigeonholed to where I'm at? And so I'm